If you have more than 3 priorities in your life, you actually have 0. And so the big idea here is that most people, they have too many goals. They're trying to do too many things. Where my future self is 10 times farther along. Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. So what you want to do is you want to really begin imagining and thinking about your future self. Those 5 questions are helpful. And you can ask those to yourself in your journal every month. You're a little bit afraid to admit it, or even if other people would tell you that's not possible, you can't do that, you want to be really honest with yourself and with your own future self, even if no one else gets it. How's it going, everyone? Happy to be with you. Thank you for having me here. Very happy to be with you. Good morning, although over there it's probably good evening.
그러면은 첫 번째 질문입니다. 상무님, 상혁이님께서 올려주신 질문인데요. 많은 사람이 자기 개발을 통해 자산을 늘리고 급여를 올려야 한다는 생각과 나이, 욕심, 조급함 때문에 매년 집중해야 할 우선순위를 3가지로 정하지 못합니다. 여기저기 기웃거리고 덜 중요하고 긴박한 것에 끌려다니다 한 해를 그냥 허비하기 쉽습니다. 40에서 45세 가장들에게 작가님께서 조언을 해주신다면 책 속에서 작가님의 3가지 목표, 자기계발, 가족 재정이 큰 도움이 되었지만 저의 목표에 적용해 보려니 덜 중요한 걸 포기하는 게 어렵네요. 네, 또한 우선순위를 잘 선택하기 위한 구체적인 방법이 있다면 알려주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so this question is about how do you choose your top 3 priorities in life or even this year? And this comes from, I learned this idea from a book called Good to Great. There's a book called Good to Great. And so the big idea here is that most people, they have too many goals. They're trying to do too many things. And so the first thing I actually want to share with you on this idea, and I'm going to share a few big ideas on how to get really clear with your priorities. But the first thing I want to share, and I'll let you translate, and then I'll share the next few steps, is the first thing you really want to do is you actually want to take some time and look at your life in the past. And you want to look at how different you are from your past self, because this will help you to see how much you've grown. And that helps you really want to have a very good relationship with your own past before you start to get really, really clear on your future. So the first thing I want to say is that you want to recognize and appreciate how different you are from your past self. So the thing that I would have people start to do is think about who they were 10 years ago. Think about back in 2014, who you are now and how different your life is from back in 2014. And you want to really think about how different you are and how much your life has changed in the last 10 years. So I'm going to give you a second to talk about that. And then I'm going to explain more and more how you can get really good at your past so that then you can get really, really good at clarifying your future. So I'm going to share my screen in a second, and I'm going to show you guys all a picture to help you really understand it. But to quickly just build off of what was just said, it's very, very important to realize that your current self, who you are right now, is not the same person as your past self. So it's very beautiful. So let me go ahead and just share my screen, and I'm going to explain this, and then I'm just going to help you really learn how to master your past, and then I'm going to help you with clarifying your 3 priorities for the long future, but also for the short future. Like, for example, the next year, 2024. So you can go ahead and share that, and then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. By the way, I just wanted to show a picture. These are my kids. These are our 7 kids. We adopted the older 3, and then we adopted these 3, and then the same year we adopted these 3, these twin girls were born. And then this is our little boy, Rex, who I wrote about. But this girl right here, Rosemary, we are right now in the process of adopting her. She is from Guatemala. So these are our 7 kids, and we live in Disney. We live in Orlando. I just wanted to show this, and then I'm going to go ahead and explain to you the past, present, and future. Okay, so here is where I'm going to explain this, and then I'll keep it really simple on on 3 priorities. But this is the common way that people look at time. They think that the past is what determines the present. And so when a person is thinking about who they are right now, usually they say, I am who I am because of the past. what I want to say is that this is not the right way. This is not how it works. It's not the past that shapes the present. It's actually this way. It's actually the present, who you are right now, that always determines the meaning of your past. And so it's not the past that determines who you are now. It's who you are now that determines what your past means. The reason this is important is because it's important to know that who you are right now in the present is not who you were in the past. You are not the same person you were 10 years ago, but you're also not the same person you were 10 months ago. And so you want to always know that in the present, you're the one who decides what your past means. But also, it's very important to realize that you are not the same person you were in the past. So one of the really, really important things that I want everyone in here to know is that your past self is not someone that you want to be mad at. There's no reason to be mad or angry at your past. Actually, you want to love your past self, but you also want to realize that you are not your past self and that you would do things differently. So one of the things that you can do, and I'm going to give you a really short time, but you could think about, how am I different compared to who I was, say 4 years ago when COVID happened in 2020, say, how am I different from who I was in 2020? One of the things you can do is you can say, back when 2020 happened, what were my goals? What was I focused on? What were my habits? Compared to now, what am I focused on and what matters to me now? And so you can start to think about, how am I different from who I was even 4 years ago? The reason this is really important is because you want to know that in the present, you're not the same person as you were in the past, but you can also even do this 90 days ago. You could go back 90 days to, October of 2023, and you can think, how am I different? And how is my focus different even from 90 days ago? And you can start to see that you've changed and you've gone through a lot and you've grown a lot, even in the last 90 days. The reason this is important is because your future self is also different from your current self. So you want to always appreciate that who you are in the present is different from who you were in the past, and that will help you to start to realize that your future self is going to be very different from who you are in the present. I'm going to teach more in a second on that thing, but I want to show you something that I do in my journal. So in my journal, at the beginning of every journal, I ask myself 5 questions. The first question I ask myself is, where am I at right now? And I basically just list a bunch of bullet points. I just list out, here's where I'm at in my life right now. I'm working on this. We're trying to, adopt our girl. I just write down like 5 bullet points, just saying, here's what my life looks like right now. Here's what I'm focusing on. So I'm just going to share with you the 5 questions, but that's the first one, is where am I at right now? The second question I ask is, what are the most important wins or progress, like wins, that I've had in the last 90 days? And so I think, in the last 90 days, what is the most important progress I've had? What are the most important wins that I've had? And I just list those out, maybe 5 or 10 bullets. Like, they could be personal, they could be professional, they could be, that you went on some great travel, they could be that you made a bunch of progress in your work, or you had some great experiences. So I just list, what are the most important wins I've had in the last 90 days? The third question is, what are the most important wins I want to have in the next 90 days? What are the most important progress, experiences in the next 90 days? And I believe every 90 days is like a year. I look at every quarter, there's four quarters every 90 days, as a full year. So in the next 90 days, what are the most important things that I want to experience and accomplish? The fourth question is, 12 months from now, in 1 year from now, who is my future self? And I only give myself 3. This goes to the 3 priorities. So I think to myself, in 12 months, so for us, it would be January 19th, 2025. What are the 3 most important things that I've accomplished as my future self? The 5th question is 3 years. So this would be January 19th, 2027. So then 3 years, I think, who is my future self in 3 years? And what are the 3 most important areas where I've made massive progress? Only 3 things that you can say, these are the 3 areas where my future self is 10 times farther along. Okay, so here we go. So just like most people think that the past is what determines the present, they also think that the present is what determines the future. This is not the correct way. The correct way is that it's actually not the present that determines the future. It's actually your view of your future that determines who you are and what you do in the present. This word mastery, I'm not sure what that is in Korean, but mastery means that this is how the masters do it. Like the masters, they don't let the past determine the present. The masters let the present determine the past, and they use the past as a tool to help them in the present. And similarly, the masters don't let the present shape the future, but they let their desired future shape who they are in the present. So right here in the present, who you are right now is very temporary. Your future self will be a very different person. So what you want to do with your future self, Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. So what you want to do is you want to really begin imagining and thinking about your future self, and you don't want to use your present self as the base for your future. You don't want to make your present self, you don't want to have to make your present self look exactly like, you don't want your future self to be based on your present self. This doesn't mean that your present self is bad. Your present self is great. You love your present self just like you love your past self, but it helps you realize that your future self will be different and that you get to choose who your future self is. It's important to realize that it's kind of like a canvas that you paint. It's not a script that you're trying to figure out. It's not about discovering who you think your future self is. It's about choosing who your future self will be. So you always want to let your desired future determine who you are and what you do in the present. You want your future to determine who you are and what you do in the present. And the past and the future are just tools. They're tools that you use to live very well in the present. So you use your past as a tool to help you live better in the present. You use your future as a tool to live better in the present. So is that when it comes to choosing your 3 priorities, you really just want to think in terms of your future self and what are the most important things for your future self and what matters to your future self. So your future self is a different person than you. And so you really want to think about what matters to your future self. And there's really not that many things. Usually your 3 priorities are the things that absolutely matter more than anything. And what's really important to realize is that what matters to you, your future self, your core priorities, it's okay if other people don't have those same priorities. I get to choose my future self. I get to choose what I really value and prize in life, and I get to focus on that, even if other people disagree. No one else can choose your future self. That is between you and you. And so it's up to you to choose what your life is about, kind of what game you're playing. We're all playing different games. And so you have to say, what is the game I want to play? Who is my future self? And it's okay if no one else understands or disagrees. That's between you and your future self. So this is the last thing I'll say on this, and then we can go to the next question. Is those 5 questions I asked, basically, where am I at right now? What are my wins for the last 90 days? What are my wins for the next 90 days? Where do I want to be in a year? And who's my future self in 3 years? Those 5 questions are helpful. And you can ask those to yourself in your journal every month. You can ask yourself those questions every month or every 90 days. There's a very, very important quote, and it says, all progress starts by telling the truth. All progress starts by telling the truth. So where you really want to start telling the truth is about what you absolutely want for your future self, even if you're a little bit afraid to admit it, or even if other people would tell you that's not possible, you can't do that. You want to be really honest with yourself and with your own future self, even if no one else gets it. It is okay if your future self, say your future self in 3 years, 3 years away. Think about your future self in 3 years and where you would like your life in only 3 areas, 3 main areas. And it's okay if those change over time. But think about your future self in 3 areas, 3 key areas in 3 years. It could be financial. It could be in your health. For me, I really wanted to write books. I wanted to write books. That was my dream. That was my future self. But what I'm saying is, think about your future self in 3 years, in 3 areas. And what I will say is this: it is okay if your future self, if your goals feel impossible. It's okay if your goals feel impossible. In fact, actually, and there's a lot of research on this, you want your goals to seem impossible. You want your goals in 3 years to seem impossible. Remember, this is just between you and your future self. And back to that picture I showed you, it's the future that determines who you are in the present. And you want your future to be impossible. You want it to feel so big that you don't know how to get there, because then you can start letting your future self allow you in the present to start doing things that are very different from what you've been doing in the past. So this is the last thing here, is be really honest with yourself. Have 3 goals, and it's okay if they are impossible. In fact, I only pursue goals that I think are impossible. Now, that doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means I don't know how to do it. And so you want your goals to be so big that then those goals force you right now, because the future shapes the present. Those impossible goals force me to ask myself, what are the very few things that really, really matter that I want to go for? And then I can start letting go of everything else in my life. A lot of the things in my life right now are my past self, but they're not my future self. So you take your 3-year goals, the goals that are 3 years away, and honestly, just say, how much of this can I accomplish in 2024? And basically just say, I'm just going to see how much of this I can accomplish just in the next 12 months. So take your 3-year goals that feel impossible, and now just say, I'm going to go for these in 2024 and just see how far I can get. Then basically what you do is you set goals for the first 90 days. 90 days. Every 90 days, you set new goals. They're huge. They feel impossible, but you only have 3. You're just trying to make really big progress in a few areas, and then you stop doing most of the things you're doing. You just make big progress in a few areas, and you let go of everything else. And so you take your 12-month goals that are huge, and you just say, how much of this can I accomplish in the next 90 days? It is okay if the goal feels impossible, and it is very okay if you don't hit your goal. So in 90 days, if I'm going for a goal that is huge, and after 90 days, I didn't hit my goals, guess what? That is okay. In 90 days from now, I'm going to be different. My future self in 90 days from now is way different than who I am right now, and they know a lot of things that I don't know right now. Every 90 days, you look back, just like I said, and you ask yourself, what's all the progress I made? How am I different from my past self? This is part of having mastery of your past, is that every 90 days, I get to look back and I get to say, wow, what's all the progress I've made? How am I different? What are all the experiences I've had? And then at that point, I can set new goals. So this is part of mastering your past, is every 90 days, you get to see, wow, how am I different? What's all the progress I made? And then from there, you can set a new goal. I'm sorry, I have to say one more thing. Is that okay? So in this book, I don't know what it looks like in Korean, but part 3, step 1. Part 3 of the book, step 1, which is clarify your purpose. Part 3, step 1. The only thing I'll say about this is that purpose is just to get where you're at now to your next level of life. And what I mean by that is, for me, when I was a student going to school, my next purpose, my next future self was to become a professional author. And that felt impossible, but that was 3 years. And so that was my purpose then, and I achieved it. And then I set a next level purpose that was next level. And every time you do this, it feels impossible to get to that level. But once you do it, your life is totally different. This is why I said, think about your future self 3 years from now. And your future self 3 years from now should be at a totally different place than who you are now. Different mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but also different in a totally different situation at a different level, focused on different things. Your future self in 3 years from now can be in a totally different place than your life is right now. You want the goal to be so big, those 3 priorities so big, that they force you to stop doing everything else. You can really only focus on a few key areas that really matter, that are going to change your life. And you've got to be honest and let go. You've got to stop doing and let go of a lot of the things that won't get you there. There's only a few things that will get you there. And most of the other things in your life, it's okay, are your past self. And those are the things you got to let go of. Even friends, even certain things, maybe a job. You got to let go of those things and only focus on the few things that are going to get you to that next level. If you're going to go for impossible goals, if you're going to go for big goals, most people in your life will not think you can do it. Most people, if I told them back when I was in school that I wanted to be a professional author and I wanted to write all these books, most people would have said you can't do that, because most people didn't believe in me like I believed in my own self. Is that when you have a future self that's 10 times bigger, meaning it feels impossible, that makes life easier than if you have a future self that's only 2 times or only a little bit different. You want a 10 times bigger future self, and I'm going to explain in a second why 10 times is actually easier than going for just small 2 times.
내가 원하는 목표가 있더라도 현실은 매우 불확실하고 상황이 계속 바뀌기 마련입니다. 내가 제어할 수 없는 환경 변수들이 존재하기에 현재 내가 하는 일에 충실히 열심히 살면 그 상황에 맞는 긍정적인 미래가 저절로 열린다는 생각은 어떻게 생각하시는지요? 그리고 10배 목표를 세우니까 너무 막연하게 느껴지는데 실현 가능한 계획을 세우는 노하우가 있을까요? 이렇게 질문을 주셨습니다.
That question was very beautiful. So that question was talking about how the environment is always changing and about just how there's so many different variables. And what I want to say is that this is why you don't want to use the present as the foundation for the future, because the present is always changing and there's so many things that are outside of your control. This is why you want to let your future be the basis for the choices you make now, is because there is a lot of things that are always changing in the present. And so you want to let your future, which is actually the future is a lot more stable. Your future is what you want to use as the thing that determines your decisions, not the environment, not all the things that change. There's a lot of things that are changing. The economy is changing. So you don't want to let the present determine what you do in the future. You want to get really clear on your future and let your future determine what you do in the present. If you let the present determine the future, usually you will lose hope, because the present is very complicated, and even the present can sometimes look pretty rough. The present can be very challenging. And so you don't want to let the present determine the future, because then sometimes you will lose hope. So I'm going to now explain, and I'm going to show you a picture. So here's what I want to say. This book is called 10x, or 10 times is easier than 2 times. What this book is, and I'm just going to explain it very simply, is that when you have a future self that's 10 times bigger, meaning it feels impossible, that makes life easier than if you have a future self that's only 2 times or only a little bit different. You want a 10 times bigger future self, and I'm going to explain in a second why 10 times is actually easier than going for just small 2 times. So there's a very famous economic law, very famous. It's called the 80-20 principle, 80-20 principle. And what it means is that 80% of your success comes from just 20% of what you do. So what this means is that very few things that you do as a person, very few people, there's very few things in your life that are creating almost all of the success. And what that means is that the rest of the things in your life, the other 80% of things in your life, are almost they're not helping you. They're not moving you forward. So this side right here is what we call the 2x mindset. What this means is that you're going for 2x, meaning you're going for double. You're trying to do more of what you're already doing. So for me, for example, that would be like me trying to double my book sales. Or it could be you just trying to, it doesn't always have to be exactly 2 times, but what it mostly means is that this is the side, 2x, means you're just trying to double or do more of what you're already doing. Basically, what we're saying here is if you're going to go for 2x, like if you're a business owner, or if you're someone who's trying to go for 2 times, you can keep 80% of what you're doing right now. You can keep 80% of your your habits, you can keep 80% of your clients, you can keep 80% of your behaviors, you can keep 80% of who you are if you're going to go for 2x. So if you're going for 2x of anything, for me, for example, if I want to double the amount of books I sell, I can keep 80% of who I am now, and 80% of what I'm doing is all I have to change is 20%. Maybe I change a few things. Maybe I, make a new product or work a little harder. To go for 2x, you only change 20%, but you keep the 80. However, if you're going to go for 10 times, and this is what I was talking about, if you're going to go for a massive goal, an impossible goal, if you're going to go for something really, really big, then what that means is that you can only keep the best 20% of what you're doing. And I'm gonna share with you a simple example of my son Caleb, who plays tennis. But if you're gonna go for something really, really big, a big future self, an impossible future self, then what that means is that future is going to require you to let go, to stop doing 80% of what you're now doing. 80% of what you're now doing has to go if you're gonna go for a big future. So let me give an example. This is my son Caleb, and this is him. He's a tennis player. He's in high school tennis. His goal is to play college tennis here in America. His coach asked him the question. His coach, one time we were talking to his coach, and his coach said, Caleb, why isn't your goal to go for pro? Why don't you want to be a pro tennis player? So where we live in Orlando, Florida, and tennis is a really big deal here. And so this is where I'm going to just explain the idea. But if he wants to go for college, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of pathways for him to get to a college. He could play for high school. There's hundreds of different coaches who could get him to the college level. But if he wants to go for pro, there's not very many paths. There might be one or two coaches who could get him there. And if he really wants to go pro, he can't keep doing a lot of what he's now doing. Only a few paths will get him to the pro or to the 10x goal. If you're going to go for 2x, or for, let's just say, if you're going to go for a small future self, what that means is 2x means you're taking the present and you're using that to create the future. So this just means that you're not thinking big about the future. You're letting the present determine what your future is. It's really, really important to realize that the future, as well as the past, are simply tools. It's a tool. So having a big future is simply a tool to help you make decisions in the present. So if my son Caleb goes for a future that's college, like the college goal, the small goal, that goal makes the present very confusing because there's too many possible pathways to get him to the college goal. So I'm going to go back to my son Caleb as an example. If he's thinking about his future self and he thinks about going to college, that view of the future isn't helpful in the present. The reason that goal, that future self, is not useful is because it doesn't force him or me as his dad, it doesn't force us to really look in the present at what would be the best path. But if he made his future self much, much bigger, like, for example, going for pro, which is an impossible goal, that's useful because that goal allows us in the present to really think about what's the best path for him, what would really help him move forward. So let me give myself as an example. When I was going to school, I really wanted to be an author. I really wanted to write books. So a small goal would be that my future self could have just been an author. I could have just been someone who writes books, but I made the goal much bigger, impossible, say 10x bigger. And rather than just saying I wanted to be an author, I said, I want to get a 6-figure book deal. I wanted to get a big book deal with one of the major publishers. And that's the goal that shaped who I was and what I did. So I went for not a 2x goal or not a small goal of just writing a book. I was like, I want to get a big book deal from one of the major publishers. And that was a much bigger future self. So whatever your view of your future is, whether it's small or big, your future is going to determine what you do and who you are in the present. Having much bigger goals, like me, for example, wanting a 6-figure book deal, much bigger goals force you in the present to make much more thoughtful decisions and to realize that most things won't get you there. It's like my son with tennis. If he really wants to go pro, most things won't get him there. And so it forces you to be a lot more thoughtful in the present about which pathways you will take. One last thing I'll say here, and then we'll go to the next question. If you're going to go for impossible goals, if you're going to go for big goals, most people in your life will not think you can do it. Most people, if I told them back when I was in school that I wanted to be a professional author and I wanted to write all these books, most people would have said you can't do that, because most people didn't believe in me like I believed in my own self. Who I am now, I have goals right now that no one else would believe I can achieve but me. No one, if I told someone, my friends, my family, about my future self, they wouldn't be able to agree. Not that it really matters, but they don't see it. And so what I'm saying is most people don't see your future self because they're looking at your current and your past self. This is why your future self is between you and you. And so I guess the final thing I'll just say here is that it's okay if other people don't see it. One of my favorite quotes is, "What other people think about you is none of your business." And so it's okay if your future self seems impossible to other people. It's your future that determines who you are in the present, but most people are going to judge you based on your present self and based on your past self, and that's okay. But also, knowing that people can change, I would just caution, try not to judge other people so much based on their current self, because other people, their future self could be massively different than you expect, and you might misjudge them thinking that that's just who they are and that that's who they're always going to be. I've done this before where I've thought, oh, that person's like, I've judged them that way, and then a couple years goes by and they're doing amazing things, and I was like, oh wow, I was judging them on their current self, but their future self was in a totally different place.
10배가 2배보다 쉽다를 설명해 주실 때 보여주신 그림에 대해 궁금한 게 있습니다. 10배 성장을 목표로 잡으면 80%의 기존 방식을 버리고 새로운 80%를 시도해야 하는데, 새로운 방법을 쓰는 것에 저항감이 많이 들어 힘들어하는 사람들에게 해주실 조언이 있으실까요? 이 질문을 마지막으로 오늘 하도록 하겠습니다.
Such a beautiful question. Such a beautiful question. Will you actually just say that is a beautiful question? So, as we've talked about, if you let the present create the future, then the future is going to look a lot like the present. Will you say that? I'm going to talk about this in steps. So share that part. If you let the present shape the future, then the future is going to look a lot like the present. You do not want the present to shape the future. Instead, you want the future to shape the present. Then that future helps you to see the few things that matter. But you can't know the few things that matter, say the 20%, you can't know that unless you're doing it from the future. The future is what determines where you focus. The future is also what determines what you have to let go. So let me give an example and then just say that this is why I said all progress starts by telling the truth. So I'm going to give an example. So when you start to think about your future self, say 3 years away, and it's an impossible future self. It's a big goal, future self. So when you start thinking about your future self and imagining your future self, then you want that big future self to kind of point the light on your current life. You want the future self to be the way you look at your life right now. And that's when you have to say, a lot of what I'm doing right now, a lot of what I'm spending my time on isn't going to get me there. So when you're thinking about this, the future self you want to be, and you think about call it the 3 priorities, right? The 3 big areas where I want to go 10x, you could say. What are the 3 areas where I want my future self to be at an amazing place? That's your vision. So this right here, this 20%, this represents the few areas where you want to put all of your focus. The more you can put your focus on these few areas, the bigger the progress you will make. Yeah, so basically this idea of the 20%, this is just the idea that there are a few things that if you really focus on them and if you get really good at them, your life will go very far. But you have to think very thoughtfully about what are the few things that if I really focus on it, and if I get really, really good at this, my future self is going to be 10 times bigger. So I'm going to give an example. And I will say this is hard. It is hard, but it makes your life easier. It's harder in the short run because it's hard to let go of things that we think we need. So that whole idea of the 80% of things, those are the things that you think you need, but you don't want. They may even be things that are good. There are things that are, the things in the 80%, some of them might be bad habits, right? Some of them might be bad habits or even people that hold you back. But some of those things actually might be really good, but they're stopping you from being really great. There's a really important kind of idea. It says that good is the enemy of great. So the 80% of things, so first off, it's your future self. Your future self, who you want to be, is what determines the path. And the path is that 20%. The path is the few things and the relationships that you really want to go big. It's your future self that determines where you focus. But also your future self is what determines what you let go of. The things that got you here, but won't get you there. So what I'm calling the 80%, that's your old self. That's your past self. It might even be your past friends. It might be your past habits, but that's your old self. Your future self is your new self inviting you to a much better place. And when you let go, when you start letting go, you don't have to let go. By the way, and it's not even a good idea. Don't let go of all of it at once. Like you let go of it a bit at a time. And I'll explain, but you let go of things. That's why you do it every 90 days. Every 90 days, you can let go of a few things and focus more on your future self. So you don't let it all go all at once. You let it go a bit at a time. I'll give a quick example. So in the book Future Self, I actually started with the story of Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast is a big YouTuber. He makes great YouTube videos. They've been like, he's the biggest YouTuber in the world. So what Mr. Beast talked about is he said when he first started, he did everything. He filmed his videos. He edited his videos. He did every single thing with making the videos. But when he really wanted to start becoming big and amazing, he had to let go of certain things and he had to actually let someone else do it. He had to let someone else edit the videos so that he could focus on making the videos really good and let someone else do some of the other parts so that the videos could get really good. So sometimes you need teamwork where you actually have a team, but sometimes you've got to just let things go. You got to say, it might be a job, or it might be a group of friends, right? Or it might even be activities like social media or stuff like that. There might be certain things or people that you just have to say, that doesn't fit with my future self. So I'm gonna let that stuff go and focus my attention where I really want to make progress. Because wherever you focus, that's where you're going to make progress. This is super important. There's a really good quote that says that 90% of the good, 90% of being good is about avoiding bad. So what I mean by that is really the biggest part about becoming your future self, aside from choosing your future self, is just letting go of the stuff that's not going to get you there. That's the biggest part, is when you think about your future self, being honest about what are all the things, that 80% of things that I'm now doing, spending my time and energy on, that aren't going to get me there. That's the biggest part, is learning to let those go and just being honest about letting those go. Letting those things go, whether it's friends, habits, even over time, it could be a job. I actually just barely let go of my coaching program. I had a coaching program where I coach people, but it didn't fit with my future self, and so I stopped doing it. Even though it was really great. It was enjoyable. I made a lot of money doing it, but I knew if I kept doing it, then I wouldn't be able to really become my next future self. This is my favorite way to think about it.
You really want your future to be a filter. Your future is the filter which determines what you say yes to and what you say no to. And when you have a really, really big future, then the filter gets rid of a lot. Like most things get filtered out. Most people get filtered out. Most things get filtered out when you have a really big future. And that's why it's powerful. You want a really clean, big filter so that you say no to almost everything. And when you start, and by the way, this stuff is all things, people, situations that they're good, they're okay, but they're stopping you from focusing on the things that are much better. If you focused on these things, which are much better, you get much more value out of your time and out of your relationships. And so if you stop doing these things, the 80% of things, if you let those things go, then you're letting go of your old self so that you can actually become something much more than you think you can. And you really can. You can become much more than you think you can if you let go of the things you're holding on to right now. That could be friends, it could be situations, people, and you really want to make decisions based on the future self that you want. The quality of your time is based on the quality of what you pay attention to. And if you're thinking about and paying attention to a lot of different things that are not that powerful, then your time and your future self are not going to be what they could be. One last thing here is just that your future self is between you and you. And so even if, like, you may love a lot of what you're doing, right? You may love where you're focused, and that's good. That's fine. That's between you and you. And so this is why you got to be really connected with your own future self and what you value. As an example, I have someone who works for me, and she's an amazing person. She was really thinking about going to graduate school, but based on her life right now, based on, she's a mom, she's got lots of kids, and she just decided, I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let go of the goal to go to graduate school because I feel like for me, my future self, the areas where I want to focus and put my time and energy, this is worth more than going to school. And so she let that goal go because she decided that there were things that mattered more to her. There were things that she cared about more and things that she wanted more. And so sometimes you have to let go of things that you thought you wanted because now you see that there's something that's even better that you can focus on. I just love this question because this is what I think about all the time is letting go of the past self. The thing that I'll say here is that the hardest part about it is disappointing the people who don't want you to change. That's the hardest part. The hardest part is that you're going to disappoint people when you start going for your future self. You'll have to disappoint, maybe like if you decide to, leave a job, you might have to disappoint some people. Or, for me, I stopped doing that coaching program. I had to disappoint some people because they wanted me to keep doing that. Or maybe you stop hanging out with certain friends, right? They might think, why are you doing this, right? So the hardest part about this, and it's what stops people, is that you will disappoint people when you start going for your future self. And that's not their fault, and it's not your fault. It's okay that they feel that way. It's okay that, but you can't live your life trying to be what other people want you to be. Like, you got to be true to what you value and making progress, and you will disappoint some people along the way. You really will. And every time you do it, you'll disappoint people. Last thought is, but by disappointing certain people, which is okay, it's understandable. By disappointing, you're going to be focusing on something that you really think is what's important. And by doing that, you will also be helping a lot of other people in a different way. For example, I might be letting go of that coaching program and I might disappoint those people, but instead I'm going to put my time into writing the next book. And even though I'm disappointing these people, which is okay, I understand, I'm also helping the people that I feel I can now help. And so even though you will disappoint some people, you'll also be putting your energy and effort where you feel you can make the biggest impact, or where you feel like it's the most important area to focus. Guys, I just wanted to say, I loved being with you guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Genuinely, I just want to say thank you, and I hope that this was useful for you. think about, for example, Elon Musk. He's trying to go to Mars. He has a lot of time where he's learning and messing up and failing. That's how you grow. There's a really important quote that says, it's not about how many years you live, it's about how much life you pack into your years. You can live 10 years worth of life in 1 year if you're living as your future self.
차파님하고 민서민규 사랑해님께서 올려주신 질문인데요. 파트 2, 미래의 나에 대한 진실 7가지에서 진실 5, 미래의 실패가 현재의 성공보다 낫다라고 하셨는데 잘 이해가 되지 않습니다. 비록 현재는 성공하지 못한 상태라고 하여도 미래에 성공한 내 모습과 연결하여 현재를 충실히 지내는 것이 중요하다고 생각되는데 이 개념과는 너무 상반된 이야기인 것 같습니다. 왜 미래의 실패가 현재의 성공보다 낫다라고 한 것인지 좀 더 구체적으로 설명 부탁드립니다. 이 질문 단톡방에서도 정말 많은 분들이 올려주셨던 걸로 기억을 하는데요. 오늘 작가님의 목소리로 한번 답변을 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
Okay, this is one of my favorite parts of this book. So the main question, if I'm reading it properly, which is part 2, point 5 about failing as your future self. Is that right? The main idea here is that if I'm thinking about my future self and who I want to be, I'm not yet that person. I'm still me, but I'm trying to become my future self. And so this whole idea is that it's better to fail trying to be your future self than to simply just succeed being your current self. If you're thinking about a goal or something you want to accomplish, your impossible goal, you're going to fail a lot along the way, meaning it's kind of like a child trying to walk, right? If a little baby is learning how to walk, they're going to fall a lot of times trying to learn how to walk. That's them failing trying to learn how to walk. So what I'm saying is it's better for the baby to be trying to walk and falling over than just to be crawling without trying to walk. So the falling and trying to walk over and over and over again is them failing as their future self. That's them failing towards their future self who is walking. And eventually by failing or falling over and over and over again, they do that rather than just crawling with no view of their future self as a walker. Another word for failing is really just learning. And if you're really going for big goals, you're going to be failing or learning a lot. It's like the baby. If you're not trying to walk and falling a lot, if you're not doing that, then you're not really living your life. You're just on autopilot and you have no future and you're just kind of existing. As human beings, we have a massive ability to adapt to what we're focusing on. So for example, the little baby who really wants to walk, if they're focused on that, they will eventually be able to do that. Human beings are very adaptive, and we really can adapt to what we're focused on. I'm going to give myself as one more example here. So I showed you the picture of our kids. We have 7 kids. This is very hard. I'm just telling you, this is very hard. It's not easy. Me, as a dad, I fail a lot. I'm like the little baby trying to walk. I'm falling on my face all the time, but I'm happier to be doing that than to just be crawling and not be falling. But I know that I will adapt, and in 90 days, in a year, I'm going to be looking back and I'm going to realize, whoa, I'm a way better dad than I was a year ago. And so it's okay to be doing things where you're kind of falling on your face, like the little baby. That's actually you living and learning, and you're growing a lot, whereas most people, they're just kind of existing. If you have a big, big future, an impossible future self, if you're going for big stuff, you're going to spend a lot of your time like the baby falling. And that's what you have to just get used to, is that's really big learning. And so if you're going to go for really big goals, think about, for example, Elon Musk. He's trying to go to Mars. He has a lot of time where he's learning and messing up and failing, but that's how you grow. Whereas a lot of people, they're not really going for a big future self and they're not failing. They would rather be comfortable succeeding, because most people, they don't want to fail. Most people would rather succeed, even if that means that they're succeeding just doing what they're already doing. than messing up learning and growing towards big goals. This is a big part of the reason why you want to always master your past, where you look back. So me, for example, I'm still going for some really impossible goals, and even today, I might fall on my face a lot of times, like the little kid. But if I look back a year ago, or if I look back 90 days ago, I can say, okay, a lot of awesome things have happened, and I can tell that I'm making progress, and I'm not the same person I was. And so that actually gives me hope. But that also helps me to see that I'm making progress. So this is why you want to look back on your past, especially when you're going for big goals, because you're going to feel sometimes like they're hopeless and that they're impossible. But if you look back, you can actually say, I'm actually making pretty dang good progress, so that I'm actually moving forward. This is why you really want to master your past and see that you're not your past self and that you are making big progress. So the last thing I'll say here is in that section, I quote one of my favorite people, and what he calls failing as your future self, he actually calls it investment in loss. What he means by that is when you're working towards something big, you have to make an investment in that future. And what that means is that sometimes you're going to lose. This guy who I referenced, he was into martial arts. And what that meant for him is that he would practice against people who were way better than him, and he'd get beat up. He'd get beat up, but because he was practicing with people way better than him, he eventually learned how to play against them. And so he had to invest in loss or in failure for a short period of time. You kind of got to get beat up. But that investment, that's why throughout this book, I talk about investing in your future self, is because that investment eventually pays off huge. And then your life's in a totally different place because you are willing to go through that period of time of learning. There's another quote that I want to share, and it's from a friend of mine. He says, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. What this means to me is that if you don't have a purpose for your future that you're working towards, your life in the present doesn't have much meaning, and you're not moving in a direction. Without a purpose in your future, your present starts to become meaningless and stale. You just kind of start to exist. And so you really want a purpose for your future that's stretching you in the present. That's really the whole point of all this. So with the quote that I just shared, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. What I mean by that is that, use my son Caleb as an example. If he went for the bigger future, which is for going for pro, I'm not saying he has to go pro. I'm saying if that was his future self, his goal, then his days would look very different. He'd be stretching towards a much bigger future, which means he would be squeezing way more juice out of every day. Every day would stretch him a lot more if he's going for a bigger future. I just want to say one more time, it's super important as you're stretching towards a big future to always look back every week. You can do it every week and just look back and say, what was the most important progress I made this week? You could look back on the month. What was the most important progress I made this month? It's very important as you're stretching towards that big future, because it can be difficult. Sometimes it can feel hopeless. But as you're stretching towards that big future, to always look back and even on short periods of time, just say, I'm making progress. It's okay. Things feel good. That helps you realize it's worth it. It helps you and over time, you can start to really develop massive faith towards big goals and just be okay. You can start to really be okay along the way as you're moving towards it, and you can really start to just enjoy it and trust that things are going to be great. Last thing, and then we'll go to the next question. I want everyone here, all you amazing people, I love you all. I want you all to think about the next 90 days. 90 days, the first 90 days of 2024. So those 90 days, think about it. Back to that quote. The only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. If you make your future bigger, and if you're going for something huge, those 90 days are going to look really different than if you're just going for something small. And so those 90 days, you're going to do a lot more failing as your future self and a lot more stretching if you're going for a big future. If my son is going for the big goal, those next 90 days are going to look really different than if he's going for a small goal. And those 90 days will be a lot more memorable, a lot more useful, a lot more valuable if you're going for the bigger future. There's a really important quote that says, it's not about how many years you live, it's about how much life you pack into your years. You can live 10 years worth of life in 1 year if you're living as your future self. And that's what I want them all to do, is I want you guys all to start living 10 years of life every year. And you get to do that by being your future self. The biggest part of life is when you're stretching towards your future self. Like when that little baby is learning how to crawl, and then eventually they succeed and they change and they become their future self. That's the big stretchy parts of life. Obviously, also just, of course, enjoying the progress you're making, enjoying your loved ones, you get to really enjoy it, but you also get to enjoy the stretching and growing, and that's really how you stretch your time. That's really how you make your time a lot more useful, valuable, and powerful.
저는 이 말씀을 딱 듣는데 예전에 고 작가님께서 해주신 말씀도 또 기억이 나더라고요. 누구나 처음엔 걷지도 못했다 이런 말씀을 해주신 적이 있는데 여러분도 용기를 가지고 더 큰 미래를 꿈꾸시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 이제 마지막 질문이 될 것 같은데요.
제가 올해 갓 성인이 된 20살이거든요. 혹시 작가님 본인의 과거의 20살인 자신에게 조언을 해줄 수 있다면 어떤 조언을 해줄 것 같은지가 궁금합니다.
There's a lot of research actually on the 20s, like that decade of the 20s to 30s. And that is the decade when people transform the most. That's a massive decade. And so you're really lucky that you're thinking about this stuff in your 20s, because you can really accomplish in your 20s what most people do in their 30s and 40s. Like that decade is huge. Most people waste their 20s. And then they spend their 30s and 40s trying to fix a lot of the problems that they made in their 20s. But if you can really use your 20s, you can actually accomplish more in your 20s than most people do in their 30s and 40s. I was 20 years old when I was told this, that you're going to turn 30 one day no matter what, so you might as well use those 20s to set yourself up massive. And so I guess the main advice I would give to you or to my past self would be, I think I could have gone for my goals a lot faster. I really wanted to write books, but I waited until I was probably 26 or 27 to really start my goals. And so I think if I would have started a few years sooner and failed faster, started failing as my future self faster, I'd be 10 years ahead of where I'm at now. And so I just think if you're really getting clear and connected on your future self, start going for it. Start going for it, failing, learning, also getting some good guidance, some good mentorship. But really, it's okay to start failing now. I hope that was useful.